The public has a long-held fascination with detectives. Detectives see a side of life the average person is never exposed to. In this podcast series, I Catch Killers with Gary Jubilant, I'll be interviewing a whole range of people you come across as a detective, including police, bad guys and victims. I spent 34 years as a cop. For 25 of those years I was catching killers. That's what I did for a living. I was a homicide detective. I'm no longer just interviewing bad guys. Instead, I'm taking the public into the world in which I operated. The guests I selected have amazing stories from all sides of the law. The interviews are raw and honest, just like the world they inhabited. No one who steps into the world of crime comes out unchanged. Join me now while I take you into this world. This episode of I Catch Killers contains conversations that some listeners may find confronting or triggering. Discretion is advised. Welcome back to part 2 of I Catch Killers with special guest Margaret Cunneen. In part 1 we talked about how and why Margaret got into the law, her work prosecuting sex offenders, and the controversy that stemmed from a lecture she did at Newcastle University. In part 2 we're going to talk about some of the high profile cases Margaret has prosecuted, what it's like changing sides and becoming a defence barrister, and just for the sake of it we'll probably throw in a little bit of controversy as well. Welcome back, Margaret.
Thank you, Gary.
Now, at the start of the podcast, I said that you actually taught me what the importance of being a public servant was. And I just want, you may or may not remember this, but we're both doing a keynote lecture. It was a conference for police. It was in the city. And I remember we were talking afterwards and I made a comment to you, why are you working with the DPP when you could clearly make a lot more money working as a defence barrister? And you mentioned to me, and you changed my thinking on what the role of a public servant is. You said, I like serving the public. It's a very important role. Now, I'd always sort of laughed at the public service. I thought, just a public servant, like they got that reputation of not really putting in. But you changed my thinking, and I started reflecting on what the role of a public servant is, and it is serving the public and how important that role is. Do you want to just talk to me about your thoughts on that?
Thanks, Gary. I've always considered service a very important goal of life, serving people. And so when I went into the public service in the Attorney General's Department at the age of 18, I remember being taught and told that you're a public servant 24 hours a day, and that was part of their reason why you couldn't have secondary employment or something. But you were paid by your fellow taxpayers or the taxpayer. So you really should be being true to that obligation and helping people wherever you can. I took that very, very seriously. Mind you, I'd been a Girl Guide and a Queen's Guide during my...
So you're a straighty 180 to start with.
Yes, it carried straight on, just helping people, wanting to help people. So every phone call you took, you really wanted to make sure that you put them in the right direction. Every bit of correspondence you wanted to help people. That was your role. And so that I don't know whether the way some of us have been treated would predispose people to want to go into a role of service anymore. Yeah. But you and I have applied ourselves very diligently to the service of the public.
Well, and credit to you, because you did actually change my way of thinking. And I look at the role of a police officer, and I say it publicly now that I'm out of the police, that the role of a police officer is very simple. We're there to serve the public. And, I'm all for police. The only issue I have is where people use public service, as in the police, for their own personal gain. And thank you for changing my thought. And I'm quite proud of the fact that I have been, during my policing career, serving the public. And it's
most certainly have. And thank you very much for it. And police are good people. They enter the police to help people, to serve people. Yeah. And so we can't lose sight of that great
what the
dedication.
Purpose is. No, well, it was an interesting take on it, so thank you for that. Now we're going to get into some of your cases, and the list of cases, I could have gone through 20 cases that people would probably be familiar with, but I've just picked out a cross-section of cases that you've been involved in prosecuting, and one case that it got my interest just because it was a sort of a unique type of an offence was a collar bomber, Paul Peters. You're involved in the prosecution of that. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, what a terrible thing that was. In fact, it's come back into the news a bit because he's about to be released after 10 years in prison. But that was remarkable because of the absolute innocence of the victim and her family, because Peters got the family mixed up, got the wrong house, and he had it in for another family, but the Pulver family were targeted by mistake. And that poor young lady, Maddie, who was studying for her HSC alone at home, 18 years old, just turned, was put through the most horrendous time all day and into the night, thinking that she had a bomb around her neck.
So just in case people haven't heard about it, I'd be surprised if they hadn't, but he broke into the house and put, for all intents and purposes, what she believed to be a bomb around her neck, like a collar.
That's
around
right.
her neck. And then, she was in fear of having literally been blown up.
And she wasn't even able to communicate. Well, she could communicate, but her parents couldn't come and hold her or touch her because the police didn't want to risk anyone else being detonated. But two wonderful policewomen stayed with her very close all day long.
Yeah.
And I know she's still she and her family are still so grateful for that bravery and commitment. But there wasn't a bomb in this apparatus. But the police did a tremendous job. Peters, even though he came from quite a privileged background and was a father of daughters himself, can you believe it?
Yeah.
But he wasn't a criminal mastermind, and he'd done some of the communicating with police for ransom and so forth by computer, and they soon worked out who it was. They followed him. There was CCTV of him on the Central Coast.
I think Andrew Marks head up that
That's
investigation.
Right.
And,
a tremendous detective.
I rate him so highly. And
yes, we both do.
I don't think the collar bomber had much hope when Marksy was on the case.
That's right. But thank goodness there was nothing there but the terror that poor girl was put through all day, and her parents. But anyway, she's wonderful now. Her family is one of many families with whom I keep in contact. Having worked with them, you meet some wonderful people. And
it's interesting how you keep that bond with people. But again, because I think it's at such extreme circumstances that you come to meet the people, that it's not unusual for those contacts to remain and
that's
friendships
true.
to remain.
And I used to approach those cases, having children myself, as though the child had, or the way I would want something done if it were my child. Yeah. And maybe that led to the zealotry about which we were speaking in the last.
Well,
I've
been accused of things and getting too close to victims and that. And if I'm talking to anyone about how to investigate a crime, I say treat the victims as you would want your family treated, and that's plain and simple. That's the only process you need to know. That when someone walks in to make a complaint about a crime or to report something, treat that person the way you would want your family member treated, and that's such an easy thing to follow.
Service, Gary, it comes back to that, doesn't it?
Well, there you go. See, all these years, and I just didn't realise, but you helped me out on it. But also the policewoman, you mentioned the bravery of the policewoman there, and that was that in a situation like that where there's a suspected bomb, obviously you clear everyone away, but a police officer made the decision to stay with the victim, knowing the consequences if the bomb was real, but to support the victim, and again above and beyond, but something that is full credit to
true bravery.
Yeah. Let's move on to some more cases, and I can just keep, I'm not doing it in alphabetical order, I probably could, but Michael Kanan, triple murderer and shootout with cops at White City.
That is a case that sticks with me for so many reasons. Yeah. Because he was already doing 3 life sentences when we prosecuted him for shooting a policeman off the fence, off the tennis court fence.
Do you want to tell people about the circumstances of that?
Yes. It was the two police on duty, uniformed constables, Fotopoulos and Patrice, were following a car with 4 men in it, and it was acting suspiciously. And it was Michael Kanan and his accomplices who were on their way to commit yet another murder. Already there was a murder spree, and Kanan had killed, 3 and perhaps more people.
There were 2 people shot outside Five Dock Hotel, and they were just involved in a brawl. That,
2 beautiful young men.
Yeah. And just something escalated, and they end up getting
it was
shot.
just a whim almost, because they were stopped there at traffic lights, just target practice. It was just terrible. But these people, these were just a gang of murderers.
Yeah.
And so these perspicacious constables thought this...
Now, I know you're a legal person because you always use those big words. Run that word past me again. It sounds good. I would accept I'm...
They picked up on suspicious behaviour in the car ahead of them.
Yep.
And so they gave chase there at Paddington, left their cars, and the Kanan and co. Started shooting back at them. And indeed, not immediately, but Constable Patrice climbed a tennis court fence to try to get a better vantage point, and Kanan shot him in the leg and in the arm, thank God not fatally. Constable,
I know Constable Patricia, Chris.
Yes.
He's a very good boxer, and he's beat me up in the boxing ring many a time.
Isn't it wonderful?
Yeah.
Isn't it wonderful?
Really nice, decent human being.
And still in the police, I believe.
Yeah.
Constable Photopoulos shot back and struck Kanan in the buttocks. But the wonderful thing was that it stopped a planned murder that night.
Yeah. And
so all of them were incarcerated from that day, and then the first few orders of business were the murders, and so Kanan was convicted in relation to 3 murders. And
that third one we talked about, the 2 at 5 Dock, was Danny Karam.
Yes.
The DK, heading up the DK's boys, a notorious group that were getting round, and in fact it was a hit on him to take him out.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was extraordinary, but so there was this terrible shootout involving the police, and Kanan was shot too. But what it did was stop that murderous rampage that Kanan and co were on, and when it went to the local court, the magistrate initially threw out the case against Kanan for shooting the policeman. And the magistrate made a remark that the police were foolhardy chasing him.
I'm stumbling my words here. Are you comfortable to talk a little bit about that?
Well, yes, okay,
because I remember that. That was astounding.
So wrong. Of course, that's what police must do, and undoubtedly that was some of the best policing of all time to stop.
Exactly.
It really was, and yet so. But the scepticism of the judiciary went on a bit more, because I remember the trial judge saying to me, "Why is this case being run, Madam Crown? He's already doing 3 life sentences." And I said, "For the victim." And the response was, But it's the victim's a police officer." And I said, "Yes."
Yeah.
And so in the end, he did get 12 years more on his triple life sentence.
Yeah.
You feel like saying to him, "You don't have to do it all; just do what you can." But
it's an interesting way of looking at it. But yeah.
But of course, it was important to do that. Now, the reason that one of the reasons I remember the case very well is that I had the opportunity to put together Constables Photopoulos and Patrice again. Mr. Photopoulos was out of the police.
Yeah.
Terrible circumstances, really. Pretty harsh, because he was a hero, there's no doubt about it. And those 2 met in what we call Court 8, which is the judgment bar at the courthouse hotel. There's 7 courts in Darlinghurst, but we always call it Court 8. And I arranged for them to meet because each had said how much they hadn't been allowed to see one another because there'd been such an investigation about what happened and so forth until that day. And to see them embrace one another.
Oh, that would have been special.
So wonderful, and I have the highest regard for both gentlemen, and wish them both so well.
Oh, well, full credit for you to organise that, but also having an understanding of the importance. Like That would have been demoralising if people thought that shooting the police officer within the police, we would be going, well, what's the point if we're not going to be supported by the court system? So yeah, it's interesting how things play out. But again, good police work, and it also highlights what the police do. And police get criticised for a lot of different things, but when they're out there, the uniform officers driving around and pulling over cars, they never know what they're going to come across, and that's just an example of what can come across.
It's tremendous bravery, isn't it?
Yeah,
and we really should be so grateful that we have such a professional, well-trained police force. It's got to be the best in the world, hasn't it, in New South Wales?
Well, I used to think so.
It's not quite as good anymore.
I still like
Someone's
them.
missing.
They're not as good as they used to be, but I still like them. No, I think it's a good police force. Another case, and this is a case that I think people would have heard of, but it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more unusual. It's horrific in the nature of it, but it's not your standard murder or type of case you come across very often, and that's the butcher of Bega, a gynaecologist called Graham Reeves.
Yes, not for the first time. I learned a lot of medicine in that trial about the appropriate treatment for gynecological cancers and so forth. But I do think that he had changed as a person, Dr. Reeves. I knew from some people, in fact, Ray Hadley had told me that he delivered some of his children, and he and his then wife were very, very pleased with
Right, so
Dr. Reeves.
He was a credible
and he
gynecologist.
was fine earlier in his life. But he changed. He became very overweight at one stage, became a diabetic. And to be as charitable as I can, perhaps some medical condition gave him some sort of, affected his brain in some way.
Right.
Because it seemed that he became cruel and incompetent. Yeah. And it looked as though he really had it in for women for various reasons. And so the case with which we started was the case of a lady who had been 58 when she was operated on for something that wasn't even a cancer yet, really, but could at worst have been dealt with by the excision of a very small part of the tissue of her genitals. But when she said that when she was being put to sleep for the anaesthetic, that Dr. Reeves had said to her what he was going to take, and she cut out basically everything, and she fell asleep and woke up, and she had all of her genitalia had been excised.
Right.
Everything. It's almost impossible to imagine, and of course it was just terrible for that lady. But he had said to her, "Well, your husband died, so it doesn't matter," and that's
not appropriate or normal comments.
No, it was really terrible, and she was a lady who really spoke her mind. And this may not be right, but it seemed to be a sort of a punishment to perhaps a rather feisty woman. Right. That's what it looked like. That may not even be true, or it may have simply been incompetence. There were certainly some doctors who spoke of a practice in the long distant past of that type of radical
because that would have been
surgery.
A difficult one prosecuting, because they would have fallen into the realms of this malpractice, medical malpractice and that. But what were the actual charges?
Well, it became a female genital mutilation case,
right? Okay.
And which was pretty new legislation, which was not aimed at that at all. It was aimed at some cultural practices that we're trying to stamp out in this state, but. So it was that type of case, and he was convicted in relation to that woman. But there were so many other women came forward with, if not such radical complaints about cruel things that he seemed to have done in the surgery.
And was this in a private surgery or a public hospital? Or
he had his own private surgery, but he operated in a country hospital without very much supervision because of the exigencies of country practice. There
And
aren't many
he's
specialists.
standing in there. He would have been considered the expert.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and it was in Bega. So the women of the town and surrounding towns were initially so pleased that they were going to have a gynaecologist obstetrician.
Yeah.
But I don't think he had any satisfied customers from there, because every woman had a different type of assault or abuse. Really, it was something like 60 or 70 women who had something.
I knew there was a lot. I didn't realise there was that many.
Yes, and there had been also a death of a woman after giving birth to a baby, and so there. It did cross both paths, but some of it was so bad, some of it was regarded as grievous bodily harm, so it was criminal as well, of course, as malpractice.
How many indictments?
Well, we did stop after a few, but there were a few trials, and in fact, one trial was a sexual assault trial, because he was also accused by about 3 women that we ran together in one trial of touching them in a most inappropriate fashion during a routine pelvic examination. So I do think that something had gone wrong with this doctor.
Yeah, there'd been a change, but it's again, that's something that's you can see how that would just be swept under the carpet if there wasn't so many people.
Yes,
involved
that's
in it.
true. And also, what did come out was that some nurses, and this, I've had this with a few doctors I've prosecuted for sexual touching of patients. Nurses really didn't have much of a voice, and you couldn't. In the past, they couldn't criticise doctors because all the doctors... The
disparity in power between the doctor, invariably the male doctor, and the female nurse.
That's correct. Yeah. And the doctor then would say, "Oh, you're just imagining it. You don't know what I have to do," and that type of thing. So at least the power, that imbalance has been redressed a great deal, with, I suppose, both sexes being represented in both professions, and certainly the profession of nursing has a much higher status with much greater qualifications attaching to it now.
Just to clarify, Graham Reeves was found guilty of inflicting grievous bodily harm for genital mutilation. He was acquitted of manslaughter over the death of the woman who died after giving birth. He was found guilty of indecently assaulting 2 female patients while conducting internal pelvic examinations, but acquitted of similar charges relating to a further 3 women. He appealed to the High Court and was released in December 2013 after 60 further charges of assault against him were dropped. Females within the law, solicitors and that, there's been things that have come out, not mentioning specifics, but things have been coming out recently, the way the female junior solicitors have been treated in different law firms. You've been a female in starting right at the bottom, working your way through the top. How have you found that you were treated? Was there a disparity between females and males?
It wasn't that bad, and but it was a bit worse. It was a lot worse in the 70s and 80s than it is now. Yeah,
truly. So it's improving.
It's in the law. It's marvellous, because women are. Well, if we're not in the majority, we soon will be. I think you've taken over. Of course, there's a woman Chief Justice. Women can achieve anything in the law, and I have never really found that any man thinks that any woman isn't smart enough to be a very able lawyer. I don't think that type of thing is in existence at all. But
was there a glass ceiling, but like when you started out?
I don't believe so. We already had the Anti-Discrimination Act, which was enacted in 1977. So in the government, women were going pretty well.
Okay.
But there were still some dinosaurs. For example, in 1988, the reason I remember it was because it was my first pregnancy, and I was rather large in the local court. I was still a solicitor then, not a barrister, so I didn't have robes covering me. And the magistrate and I walked in to appear in some court in a committal proceedings, and the magistrate said to me, "Is it Miss or Mrs. Cunneen?" And I said, "Oh, it's Ms. Cunneen, Your Worship. And he said, well, in my court, in that condition, you'll be Mrs.
Oh, no, really?
Yes, yes. And so
Oh,
there
my
have been
dear.
a few things like that, and things that you can tell. I had a judge too
Who said magistrates are out of touch?
well, that was 1988.
Yeah.
And definitely that gentleman has long since left the bench, if not the world. But there was a judge too who I remember. I was also pregnant. This time I was as a barrister, but it was probably obvious. It was a sex case during which there was some debate about the meaning of a sexual term.
Right.
And I remember I was on my feet, large with child,
Yeah.
and explaining the meaning of it so far as our case
Yeah.
was concerned. And he said to me, well, you're the expert. and I said, well, thank you, Your Honour, and had to take it that way.
Yeah.
But there was a prurient glance at my male opponent, and I know they both
right,
enjoyed
yeah,
that.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that sort of thing takes place, but you just have to move.
Yeah.
Or it used to take place. I dare anyone to do it now.
You would have to be stupid or terribly ignorant.
Yes.
To make those type of comments now.
But that's right. Yes, it's really. I think that there may be other workplaces which are might still have a lot of sexism in them, but the law's going pretty well, and even if you can find some faults, it's a whole lot better than it was.
I think we're all moving along. Organisations like the police are certainly, it was male dominated, but they've made appropriate adjustments, and I think we're all waking up to the realities of the world and
Yes.
equality, which is
Yes.
a good thing.
Tremendous.
Controversies. I told you that I'd ask some about the controversies, but that's all right.
I'm not afraid, sir.
No, no one's ever accused you of ever being afraid. The ICAC inquiry.
Well,
and can I, just before you talk on it, I want to...
I'm lost for words. No, I'm not.
You're not going to talk about it? Oh, this will be I'll turn it into an Eurus interview. I'd just like to make the comment of my observation of it. I felt it was outrageous how that played out, and I supported you.
You did, thank you.
I also get the sense that other people sort of distance themselves from you at times, but your true friends and people that have got integrity stood by you. It must have been a horrible experience. I've experienced something similar in what I went through in the last couple of years.
You certainly have. Similarly misconceived.
Yeah, well, talk me through it, what that experience and whether it changed you, and just from a personal point of view.
Well, of course, there was an agenda running, but ICAC didn't know what the allegation was going to be. It started on a winter's morning when these ICAC investigators came to my house rapping on the door really loudly when I happened to be alone in the house. And I got up in my dressing gown and they showed me a notice to produce signed by the then commissioner, who I'd been friends with for over 30 years, had worked with very closely for years, and so I thought it was an April Fool's joke. Right. So that's sort of okay. You want a cup of tea? I was wondering when all the friends are going to jump out and see what see how funny it was that I'd been taken by surprise. Yeah. Seriously. Yeah. And so it wasn't worrying. And I said, "What is it all about?" We can't tell you. Well, they didn't really know. Yeah. They had to seize the phones, and I found out then that they were also seizing the phones at my son's place at the same time, another team. Yeah. And we didn't have a clue what could possibly have linked us for quite some time. Yeah. Anyway, I was very confident. There was one thing that I had never been, was corrupt. Yeah. I would have done my job for free. I certainly wasn't taking money for doing it any sort of other way. There's certainly no corruption. So go your hardest. And but then they developed an allegation about a car accident that I wasn't even at. Yeah. A car accident involving my son's then girlfriend He wasn't even at the car accident.
Yeah.
She was alone. She was alone in the car. She was not at fault. She'd been T-boned. She hadn't had a drink. She hadn't committed an offence.
Yeah.
And she'd been taken to hospital in an ambulance straight away because the car was a write-off. She'd been suspended by the seatbelt up with the car up on its side.
Yeah.
There were many, many witnesses. This was in the main street of Willoughby, outside the pub. On that occasion, I wasn't in the pub, but I was at home and sober myself. But we found out that she'd been taken to hospital. And you know as well as I do, better than I do, that when someone's in a car accident, their blood is taken.
Blood sample. So
and so was hers.
Yeah.
And the blood was taken, and it was completely zero for alcohol and drugs. And a probationary constable of police could easily work that out, but ICAC couldn't. And ICAC went on this thing about I'd told her to avoid a breath test, but it wasn't a breath test situation.
Yeah.
The Ambos got there first. The police later came and blocked off traffic and everything because it covered up lots of lanes of traffic. The fireys came and everything else, so I understand from witnesses who contacted me when they were horrified. Anyway, it became an allegation that I had somehow conveyed to her a message to fake chest pain to avoid a breath test. There was no communication between her phone and mine. Her phone was in the wreck of the car. My son wasn't there. He went to the hospital.
You did well then. How did you get a message?
I did so
there?
well. Apparently I must. I don't know. But anyway, the samples had already been taken by then.
Yeah.
Did ICAC perform the most fundamental inquiry of all? Did she have a blood test?
Yeah.
No, they didn't. But the police had done their job. There was absolutely nothing about this, and I'm still rather at a loss to know what it was about, although it's said to be some phone call I later had on someone's phone with a smash repairer who I knew, a local guy that does drink in that pub, and one of my sons works in with cars, so I knew him through that, and he'd asked me about Sophia, and there was some remarks about that she'd gone to hospital with chest pain. Yeah. But that was days later. And I've never been served with that phone call. But if we'd had a joke about something, well, please. Yeah, does anyone have any jokes these days?
Well, apparently not. Not if they're looking at targeting you.
Oh, well, that's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. And I know they had trouble formulating because at one stage there was a phone call from them asking for my government e-tag. I said, I've never had a government e-tag. Oh, well, what e-tag was in that car? And I said, what do you want an e-tag for? To find out when she went over the Harbour Bridge. And I said, well, she was going north over the Harbour Bridge. Yeah. Oh, you don't incur a toll that way. Oh, don't you? Mm-hmm. So that really, there was just, there was the... This is the trouble with having investigators who, unlike the police, never have to hit the witness box and explain why they do things.
What they've done. Yeah.
Where if that was a police officer, they'd be called to account. But these faceless people, and also these people who probably aren't trained in criminal investigation, they might be some kinds of half-baked lawyers or something.
I can see your frustration, and I know how it impacted on you, and you're strong, you're resilient.
Well, it wasn't embarrassing, thank goodness.
No, but it's you don't need that, and the invasion of the
suggestion
privacy
of corruption.
Yeah,
I mean, where did that come from? What could that possibly be? And so in the end, of course. I stopped it. I didn't stop it for myself. I stopped it for two innocent people, my son and his girlfriend, who were not public servants. Why should they be subjected to all of their whatever's in their phone? I don't know. To being disemboweled in the public sphere without the usual protections of the criminal law. If there's a crime, charge them with a crime and allow them to have lawyers. Yeah. Don't have an investigation in the public eye with going where, who knows, just to embarrass them and me, I suppose, was the target. So it got stopped, and luckily for me, even after ICAC dragged me to the High Court appealing what our state courts said, that they had no jurisdiction. After the High Court, the Commissioner pressed on and sent it to the DPP and said, can you find any criminal conduct here? There was absolutely no criminal conduct found against any of us. So luckily that was the finding. But that took years. And so, as you say, during that time, some people just dropped off altogether, but other people stayed with me. Other people rang me every day.
Yep.
You rang me.
Yep.
You looked after me. So many people did that and stuck with me, and never. The loyalty was never wavering. That's when you find out who your friends are.
It's
so I'm really glad. And since then, I've had people come to me and say, "Oh, can you help me with this and that?" I said, "Have you been out of the country for a couple of years?" I didn't hear from you. "Oh, I didn't want to ring you because I knew your phone would be off." Well, what do you think? You might have been in trouble for being a friend.
You phone up and say they're supporting you. Yeah.
So it's great to know who my friends are. I've got great friends, and that's how we get through these things, isn't it?
It's interesting, and obviously that I can relate to it very closely on what happens and how people sort of distance themselves from you if there's just a hint of any problems. Looking from the outside, and I have a lot of people say this about my matter, and they're looking from the outside. I'm looking from the outside with your situation, and it was clear to me, or the belief I had, they were targeting you because of who you were. And it was a scalp that would have been someone, for whatever reason, would have liked to have brought you down. That's how it came across. I'm sure.
It did, yes, it's the timing. There was some significance to the timing. I just finished a commission of inquiry at a particular status. Perhaps people didn't want me to be offered any other commensurate jobs. I don't know.
There's a smell about it, and I think the way that you've dealt with it is just move on, and best form of vengeance is just get on with your life. But it does impact, and I know, like I had search warrants, as you know, had search warrants executed and my phone's seized, and the first allegation against myself was I falsified affidavits, which if I had, I'd expect to go to jail.
Yes.
And no problems there. But they hadn't even found out what was false in the affidavits. They've just come with this allegation, you falsified affidavits. To this day, no one's been able to tell me what
Any
was
particulars.
supposedly was false in the affidavit, and besides the fact it wasn't even the affidavit I did.
And that went nowhere. And as you say, that is a criminal allegation if it happened, but they didn't have it.
But
so they have to look for something else, don't they?
Yeah.
Because no one can say sorry. I was on the wrong track here.
I thought when they came after me with falsifying affidavits, well, you would have triaged that first and find out what's false in the affidavit, then come and speak to me. But no, they came at me falsifying affidavits, but didn't even know what was false in the affidavit. So anyway, it's frustrating, but between you and I, we move on.
We do move on. But yes, the parallels struck me.
Yeah, and it's almost, and I referenced at the start of when we came back that when you were telling me about the role of a public servant, and it sort of checked my thoughts on it. When we were doing that, keynote, you also said there was a couple of things that were simmering about you that you warned me that be careful if you get a profile in a public position. There's chances are that people will try and bring you down, and it was almost like watching what happened to you, and then I saw what happened to me. So yeah, I can relate, but it hurts. It hurts, and especially in your one with your family being dragged into it too.
Yes, that's right. Well, the police don't do that, do they? Even with the worst murderer, they don't make the family suffer. That's only a tactic if there's no evidence.
Yeah.
And if there's no evidence, I suppose the tactic is make it. I'm not talking about the police now, but for certain quasi-investigators, make the family suffer so that the target says, please make it stop, I'll tell you anything you want.
It's an intimidation through a third party,
yes.
Isn't it? It really is. With there was something else that in 2018, I think it was, that the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, appointed you as one of 3 experts on a panel to advise on the development of federal anti-corruption watchdog. Do you want to talk to me about that, how that came about?
Yes, that was very gratifying because
this was after all this incident happened, so someone must have trusted you.
Yes, oh, thank goodness. I
Yeah.
think any thinking person knows to trust me.
Yeah.
But it was because I had seen it from inside and outside how an unsuccessful corruption body works, and it seems to me that it's too ambitious and serves no purpose to run investigations in the public. So that was one of the things that our committee recommended to the federal government about the instigation of such a body, that investigations should be private.
Yeah.
Just like the police don't want everyone knowing when they're investigating someone.
No.
But it seems there's an excuse. The excuse is, throw light on it. Well, there's always time to throw light on it if you've got a proper, if you can prove a case.
Yeah.
But there's no point throwing light on something.
Like a Royal Commission, they approach things, an investigation a different way. But it's. You can't pull it back if it gets out there, can you?
No, that's right. And unfortunately, it looks like then the process is meant to be the punishment.
Yeah.
And that can never be our law, that people are punished before proper proof of any wrongdoing.
No, well, we've got to believe in the system. And it's not perfect, but it's not a bad system.
It's a very good system.
Charge
people. Do your inquiry in private. Charge people and put them before the courts, where the usual onus and standard of proof applies. Proof beyond reasonable doubt.
The checks and balances. We were talking the other day, and you mentioned a matter that made me laugh about a person. Well, I'm not laughing about what he was charged with, obviously, but what happened at the court. A person that was charged with triple murder, and his accomplices were seen in the charge dock. Do you want to tell that story? Because I think, and it's interesting, I think people that listen to me speak to people like yourself or other homicide detectives, we can find some humour in the tragedy, and it's not disrespecting what's before the court or what's happened, but it's a way of coping. And when you told me that story, I must admit I had a laugh. So
a terrible criminal, Anthony Richard Dent, who is a triple murderer and a lifelong criminal. He's over 60 now, but he spent all but 4 years of his adult life in prison. But he was charged with his third murder, and he was in the dock at Court 3 Darlinghurst with his two accomplices, two young fellows, one of whom had lured the murder victim to the site where, incidentally, Dent had killed two other men years before at the same place, 50 metres away from where he had bashed and stomped to death two other men. Done some time that had been recalculated. He'd gone to jail for life before, but that had been reduced, and he was out again. And so he was in the dock with the two young accomplices who he heard were going to plead guilty. And he knocked them both out in front of us. In front of the judge was on the bench. Yeah. The courtroom was packed, and he just lit into both of them. One went hurtling down the stairs down towards the cells, and the other one was slumped over the other side of the dock. Of course, our people that. There wasn't anyone who could stop. This guy is a very violent, energetic psychopath. Yeah. And he punched them out in no time. And the judge tried to speak and said something, about stopping what he was doing. And then he turned on the judge and he said to the judge, "If you look at me like that, I'm going to come up there and effing pull your face off, you see." And and so finally the correctives and the sheriff's officers and everyone bundled him down and got him down away from the place. But the judge said to me, "Madam Crown, I would have expected you to advise my chambers by way of email that this was a violent man, and
Oh, you're in trouble.
I'm afraid I said, well, I would have thought, seeing as he's done so long for 2 murders and he's up for his 3rd, it might have been obvious. But I thought, well, imagine if I started writing to judges' chambers. What would the defence say if I was always saying, this one's a baddie, Judge?
I'm thinking from a police point of view. I'd love the DPP they're able to write to the judge saying, this one's really bad. Yeah, watch out for this one.
Yes, but that's so. Quite often, almost never, does a violent criminal commit violence in the court. But he's a bloke who had nothing to lose, and any look at his record would have made that very plain. He was never going anywhere again. He'll never be let out now, surely. And so he had nothing to lose. He might as well. I got to cross-examine him in that trial. Yeah. And I had in my bar jacket my Cubitan because we were so close and I was riling him up a lot. And I thought, he's so close to me. And none of those blokes who brought him from correctives who were all over 100, I'm sorry to say, lovely fellows, but really. I was ready. To fight him. Yeah. And I had that ready all the way, and I said to him at one stage, he wasn't a violent man, was he, when he was trying to put the blame onto someone else? And he said, not as violent as me, no. And I thought that was going to be the moment. I think that anyway, he's gone, but he's gone to jail, and we'll never see that again. The scourge of Newcastle, but there were amusing aspects to that trial.
Have you ever, because you have put away some very bad people, have you ever felt intimidated? As in, you're out there. People, you worried about people having a go? Yep.
There are one or two, but I don't want to give them a shout out. They're both at large.
Right answer, Margaret, because I get asked that all the time. I go, no, I'm not scared of anyone. But you don't show weakness. Very, very good. People that you look up to. I know in policing, and I pay homage to people that had trained me, and one person that we both know, Paul Jacob and Andy Waterman. They were sort of people that helped me out in my homicide career. Pam Young, I learnt stuff from Pam Young.
Marvellous detectives all.
And the lineage that those detectives carried down, it was Mike Hagan and Ron Smith and people like that.
I worked with them too back in the days.
You remember them all, and you'd even remember my first partner in plain clothes, Jim Williams.
Yes,
and what a
at great, Hornsby. Yeah, what a lovely man.
Yeah, and a really good detective, and I was so fortunate to have him. They've been my mentors, and there's a lot of other people that I've learnt things from. In your field, as a legal person, who have you looked up to and who have you learnt from?
Reg Blanche, the first DPP, and Nick Cowdery, the second DPP, were wonderful lawyers, leaders and administrators, not often found in a single person.
So break that down again. Lawyers,
leaders and administrators.
Yeah, it's an interesting combination, isn't it?
Yes, and they were both tremendous at that, with probably not a great deal of experience about running organisations, but more importantly, what I learnt from them, because they'd both been defence counsel and then become the head prosecutors in the state. I learnt from them the even-handedness and the independence that one needs as a prosecutor.
Yeah.
That was as Nick used to say, there'll be no victory parties here. Justice is just done. Yeah. Sometimes my excuse for that had to be, Nick, I go to the pub every afternoon. But
you weren't celebrating victory. This is where I go.
No, I'm always laughing.
I've got my fingers crossed. I can't say. I've never seen you at the pub drinking after a court matter. Anyway.
Nothing out of the ordinary.
Some of the best advice is you take on board, but you can't necessarily follow all of it. So
yeah. Well, that's very true. But so it was that even-handedness and that sense of detachment that you need. Yeah. And also they backed you. Those guys backed you. I can remember many with some of the controversies about which we've spoken.
Yeah.
Oh, Nick Cowdery was tremendous about my lecture, and about the complaints. He always took my side, and perhaps about discussions in relation to what you've done in court, if something there might be a problem, and even if he disagreed with what you did, if you explained why you did it, he'd say, "I can see why you did it, and I'm going to back you." Now that is leadership.
Yeah. And you mentioned Nick Cowdery, and it's a while back, but I do remember, and I remember so many people speaking highly of him.
Yes.
And the type of stuff that he was doing. But,
well, he knew his people. He knew what each person was capable of.
Yeah.
He knew who to trust if they said this case is no good. Get rid of it. And he trusted you, and you had some authority in the office because of that trust.
And you respond to that trust too. And I had Ian Lynch, who I think you know as well. He was on the podcast, and he was talking about leadership in the police and how when Mike Hagan was our boss at North Region Crime Squad, we did the right thing because you wanted to do the right thing by that person. And it sort of comes across when you're talking about Nick Cowdery.
That's right. They felt a bit, not a father as such, they're not that old, but it was someone you wanted to make proud of you.
Yes, yeah. They put their trust in you, therefore you're going to reward
and
them.
make the office look good.
Yeah. It's an interesting way of leadership, isn't it?
Yes,
when you
it really is.
Look at it like that.
Reflect well on the office, for them and the office of which we were proud.
Mm. Would you recommend a career in law for people starting out?
I suppose I would, because it's such fun.
Yeah.
The criminal law is so interesting,
yeah.
and so nothing's ever the same. So you could never be bored. But I don't know if anyone can approach it the way that I did. Now, many people ask how to do it, but I don't even know if it's possible to go into as almost a cadet lawyer and be fostered through
your way all the way up.
But I do recommend, I really do recommend working as early as one can, and not staying at university too long.
Yeah.
Get into that workforce. Not only are you easier to employ at a younger, less qualified stage, but you get the experience, you find out what you want to do, and you start your life. You start earning money and
experience.
And getting experience that will count.
And I help you study all the law books available, but you still need that understanding of human nature and everything else that makes a complete package. When did you become a senior counsel?
In 2007, so it's 14 years ago.
And how did you feel when that? Because it's an honour and it's a privilege, and so people can understand it. Do you want to just explain what? The title?
It's very mysterious.
Yeah. Well,
no one really
legal
knows.
Type are always a little bit funny, walking around in your gowns. But tell us about it.
And no one really knows what goes on in the minds of those who select a senior counsel. It's a select group from the Bar Council, and I've never been on that selection committee, so I don't really know what they can consider. But what I do know is that they poll very widely. They ask judges from all courts and barristers, solicitors, and they have forms that go out to find out whether people recommend the appointees. And there's only a small number, maybe 20 a year, who are elevated from the general ranks of barrister to the ranks of senior counsel. It used to be known as QC.
Yeah.
And when it was QC, it was appointed by the Attorney General. So it was probably even more arcane. It would have been impossible to find out how the Attorney General decided. But now it's no doubt much more democratic. But some people have to apply for a long time. I certainly applied more than once. And some people never get it, perhaps inexplicably. But it doesn't make a lot of difference. It didn't make any difference to me as
it's recognition by your peers, but would
yes,
that
it
be
is.
a way of
Certainly
describing
it is, and there is, one feels a degree of greater respect being afforded to you. But this is an old person's job, being a barrister. It's one of the few. You do feel that respect from when you're the oldest one in the court, as I frequently am now, much older than a lot of the judges. So maybe it's age, but it also carries some authority. But it certainly means now I'm in private practice that I cost more. But as a prosecutor, it didn't make a lot of difference, because it doesn't come with an automatic promotion or anything. I was already doing murder trials, so it didn't change the work I did, and it didn't increase my pay then.
Yeah. I know it was within the police. It was police like major crime detectives. When we heard it, it was a popular appointment. So for what it's worth, you're very popular.
Well, I received many congratulations from the police, so I was very, very proud of that.
Yeah. Another thing I want to touch on, and because there's not a lot of people that have shared the same experience, but there's one experience that we've shared, and with the work that you do, you're a public servant, as we've discussed, and the profile comes, and there was some recognition that came your way that I think invokes some jealousy. But the Janet King show, it was a follow-on from Crownies, and it was reported that Marta was actually, the way that she played the role as on Janet King, a lot of it she'd drawn from watching you go about your work. Well,
it started with Crownies, when Crownies was still an embryonic idea.
This is for those that don't know. This is a TV show. I think it was on the ABC.
Yes,
Crownies,
that's right.
For a couple of seasons, and evolved into Janet King.
It did, and Screen Time came to see Nick Cowdery. So he set it with, and they brought, and Marta Dusseldorp was with the team. And as she tells the story, he said to her, "You've got to meet Margaret Cunneen." So he called me up, and Marta and I went to have lunch soon after. She came to court with me many times. She came into conferences, and she did develop certain mannerisms. She did it. As she says, she followed me. She got in my silks and followed me around. And we are very close friends. She's such a great lady, a wonderful, wonderful actress. In fact, when she got an ACTA award for playing Janet King, and it was right at the height of my troubles, shall we say, the start of, in January 2015, she invited me, and I took my son Steve, who was embroiled in the trouble too, as my partner.
Right.
And she and Marta and her husband, Steve and me were all on the red carpet at this ACTA Awards. And in her acceptance speech, she referenced me. The camera panned in, and she said, "Well, I play this role as an actor, but the real person is here." And what an accolade! What an expression of support in such a public forum. So that she is one of the great friends and supporters I've had in my life. And
look, I think it's fantastic and well deserved, and it's because of how hard you've worked. And it's interesting telling the story of how you came to meet. But there'll be detractors from that going, "Oh, what's this person doing getting spotlight like that?" Because I experience, and this is why it's interesting sitting down having a chat with you, similar things with the underbelly stuff. And that was, police spoke to Screen Time about a murder investigation, look at the one they're doing here, and that played out. And what I found with Underbelly, because Matt Nable played me, you can see why they get paid the money, don't they? They can really mimic.
Yes, it's very confronting, isn't it?
It is confronting, and Matt can play me better than I can play myself sometimes, and I stay in contact with him. People within the police, the ones that do just as good a work work better than I work, they were happy to see some recognition because it reflected on criminal investigation. It was a team thing. It wasn't just one person running a job, but there was other people that I could really just feel the knives in my back because of it. And it frustrated me. I didn't understand it. Like, why can't you enjoy someone else's recognition
Yes,
of
because
success?
the next time it might be them.
Yeah.
People shouldn't, there's an old Zen principle with which I'm sure you're familiar. Lengthen your line. Put all your energies into your own progress. Don't be putting your energies into knocking other people down. Because they too have their time. But there's one thing about publicity and the glare of the media. You can't attract it if it's not interested, and any more than you can keep it away if it is. So you and I didn't ring up people and say, come to our court cases. Well, it's because we were doing interesting cases, perhaps in interesting ways. And it attracts that attention.
Well, when I had enough of the sniping or whatever, I fronted a couple of people and said, what, do you think I phoned up Channel 9 or Screen Time and said, hey, come and make a TV series about me? Like, just go away. Like, you have no idea what you're talking about.
Yes.
Like, you don't go, oh, let's make a TV series.
Well, that's right. So I remember someone said to me, well, the best thing you should do is stay out of the media. And I said, well, how do you manage to do it? You must give me a pointer.
Maybe not do any work.
That's right.
I know. And look, if we say that, people go, oh, who do these two think they are? But you've got to look at it realistically. And I'm proud of the fact that they did an underbelly about an investigation. I worked on with a team. It wasn't just me. I'm proud about that. And if that inspires other police to do things. The same with your show. And funny story, I was at it was a murder trial, and it was at Darlinghurst Court, where you can sit above or below when you're outside the court, and people don't often...
That's a real trap.
Yeah, people can be talking about...
There's amazing acoustics there.
Yeah, not realising. And there was a group of barristers that were talking about... Janet King, and saying, "Oh, I don't watch that crap. I don't watch that." And I heard that and thought, "Oh, well, that's just like an attack on you," because it was obviously the talk around the courts that Janet King was, based loosely on what you do. And then the same group were talking to another group, and they're going, oh, if they did a show on me, who do you think would play me? Like, so they just they're pretending that they're not interested and they wouldn't do that. And then on the same day, they're having a conversation, fantasising about who would play them if they made a TV series.
That's right.
I think that just reflects on what's going on. And I've owned it. I've said I was proud and honoured that they want to do something about doing in work, and I think if anyone's honest with themselves, they would be too. It's nothing. We didn't do anything to be ashamed of.
No, that's
just
true.
Doing your work.
That's true. I received a funny message from Charles Waterstreet
yeah.
about whom he says the rake character is. And he was one of the writers, it's true.
Yeah.
But he sent me a message just the other day saying, it's good I've left the bar so you can try to replace me.
He's an interesting character. And there are some interesting characters in the legal fraternity, aren't they? Some of them I begrudgingly, I don't like, but I respect because they're pretty funny. And you must have seen it in the courts. There is some very witty, smart people that get around the courts. And
that's
their
right.
Sense of humour is, quite,
Oh, it's really good. Well, can I mention the time when Roger Rogerson was a witness for the Crown in a case? He wasn't an investigator in it, but
right.
We had to call him because, in fact, he was in custody, and it was in 1995, and a con man who I was prosecuting was saying to his victims, "I've got Roger Rogerson helping me, and so you'll be killed or something if you don't do this." So I had to call Mr. Rogerson to say he was no part of the case. Yeah. Well, it was on a number of levels, and I remember that a very highly respected detective inspector took me down to meet Roger in the cells, and I remember they greeted each other as warmly as you can through glass. But I saw a tear drop from that detective's eye onto his papers to see Roger so reduced. Yeah. So he came into the courtroom in Prison Greens, and I asked him whether he'd been part of this scam, and he said, "No, of course not. No. It didn't have anything to do with it, and I'll tell you why," and so forth. And cross-examining counsel said to him, Mr. Rogerson, you are the Roger Rogerson who has been accused of trying to kill one of your police colleagues, aren't you? And he said, everyone I've tried to kill is in Rookwood, mate.
Wrong, but yeah, these are those classic court moments, aren't they?
That's right. Yes, very memorable.
Yeah, and there's so many of them. I can't remember them all, but I can sit there in court and nothing's really interesting me the whole day, and then someone will get in there and it's just this sparring. I see Winston Terracini always interests me. Some of the battles I see he has in court, and that always sort of puts a smile on my face the way he approaches matters. What's for Margaret in the future?
Well, I'm really enjoying private practice as a defence counsel. I'm enjoying it far more than I ever thought I could.
Yeah.
And I think making a difference, helping people who need help and getting the right results. There is a book being developed by a wonderful writer, Andrew Urban, who has got some ideas. I'm terribly well. I've been busy, but I haven't. There are some aspects about writing or even talking about yourself that are quite difficult.
Can I add something here as a published author? Don't laugh. I went through that process. I know exactly what you're saying, and I had a real reluctance when there was talk of myself doing a book. The thing that pushed me across the line to it was the fact that because I had a profile, good, bad, indifferent, or whatever, people talked about who I was. People I'd never met were making assumptions about the type of person I was, rightly or wrongly, but they had never met me. So I thought, writing a book, it was confronting, but you get to tell who you are. So if you're asking for my advice and you're not asking for my advice, I think that's a good idea. Like you have got so many stories and so many lessons.
Fortunately, I have a professional writer to sift through the documents and things I've hoarded over the last 45 years.
Well, you haven't slowed down, have you? And I'll make this comment to the people listening to this podcast. When we had our break, so we could just freshen up, Margaret actually had a brief on the table here where we're recording the podcast, looking through the brief.
I can't wait to read it.
So, yeah, that's the type of commitment. How would you like to be remembered when you have finished? And I'm thinking that's 20 years down the track.
Oh, thank you. It probably won't be that long, but it's a good job for dipping in and out of. I really hope that everyone for whom I have worked thinks that I did my best, worked as hard as I could, and was true to the trust they reposed in me. That's
a good legacy to leave, and I know I can talk from the police point of view. You've inspired people, Margaret, so thank you for your service to the public now that you've taught me what that is all about, and just thanks for being you, because I think in the legal system we need people like you, people that are prepared to push it and stand up for what you think's right. So it's been a pleasure chatting. We could do plenty more talking about other stories and things, but thank you.
Thank you very much for talking to me, Gary. It's great to see you again.
Well, that's Margaret Cunneen, a true force of nature who actually dares to care. I personally think the staid legal system is better off because of people like Margaret. Having been a detective for a long time, I spent plenty of time in the courts. One thing that continuously frustrated me was the intellectual arrogance and disconnect legal people displayed. People like Margaret brought some humanity to the legal system. Surely that's not a bad thing. Also believe her critics were in most parts motivated by jealousy as a result of the recognition Margaret received because of the outstanding work she was doing. There was an assumption that Margaret was some kind of zealot because of the way she would prosecute matters in court. It's very interesting to see her now defending people in court. Margaret hasn't changed her ways. She's defending people with the same passion and dedication in which she would prosecute. Maybe she's not a zealot, maybe she just cared. We have a very special episode next week on I Catch Killers. We're going to discuss how murders are solved. I'll be interviewed by crime journalist Ava Benny Morrison about the murder of Bob Lubick. Mr. Lubick was thrown off the gap. We talk about how this murder was solved from start to finish. It will give you a real insight into what goes on during a murder investigation. I hope you can join us next week when we discuss how a murder is solved.